Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Ryan Fleming. Wanted to wish everybody a happy 7th of August, 2019. I can't believe summer's almost over, and looking forward to fall, but trying to soak up the last few days of summer. Hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for your time today. We got 30 minutes of some jam-packed information on one of the most pressing topics, I think, facing our country. Many of you may be clients already and want to get caught up on some of these things, or some of you may be guests or people that are having kids coming up through the pipeline, getting ready to go to college. So as always, we want to put together these good informational webinars to help give you guys some fuel, some ammunition to make smart, wise choices. So today we're going to talk about the 4 biggest mistakes parents make when planning for college. And I kind of want to first, start off the presentation today with this slide that just kind of hits us right in the face. It talks about college costs are skyrocketing. If you look back to the late 70s into 2015, going into 2016, these numbers are even going to be more profound here in 2019. But you can see that college is just crushing a lot of other things in our country, like medical expenses and shelter, the consumer price index, and the cost of food. College is growing at 1,200% since 1978, and it's probably closer to 1,300% as of today. So, wow, that just kind of demands our attention as a society to say, well, what do we do about these crazy skyrocketing costs relative to college? And it doesn't take too long to realize that college is really expensive. These are the average yearly costs of private and public schools throughout our country. These were taken right from the school's websites, posted 2018, 2019, tuition, room, board, books, including like transportation and other fees. You look at Ohio State and most private or public schools, state schools, they're going to be hovering right around that $22,000 to $25,000 a year range. You look at schools here domiciled in Columbus like Otterbein or Capital, great schools in their own rights. They're pushing $50,000 a year. Oberlin is a school here that's one of the top liberal arts schools in the country in many people's lists. That's close to $75,000 per year. Even the school up north, Michigan, in-state and out-of-state, $30,000 and close to $65,000 a year, as you can see. So these costs are crazy different than what they were a generation ago. And if you look at the cost of college rising at somewhere between 5 to 9%, that certainly doesn't keep up with our paychecks or even that of inflation over the past 20-some years. So basically, we know that it's expensive no matter where your kids are going to go. 4 years can cost anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 or more out of your pocket. And the question that really sometimes gets us is, how long is it going to take little Jimmy and little Johnny to actually graduate and get that undergraduate degree? What if your child takes 6 years to graduate? I think the national average to get a undergraduate degree at state and public schools is closer to like 5.5 years. And that just costs you more time. Private schools are graduating kids quicker. They're graduating them closer to 4 years. But, depending on how many kids you have, like myself, I have 3 beautiful children. And you start multiplying it, and guys, it's a life-changing number. And I say that because I really do think people spend more time planning for like a Walt Disney World vacation or, going on a camping trip, which is great. I love that stuff, and you should be doing that. But they just don't plan a lot as in depth as what I would like on this big wealth transfer called college. And so what I wanted to do is talk a little bit deeper about this. Is one of the biggest issues that I see is families just can't define what I call the college gap. And the college gap is simply the difference between the net price of college and what your family can afford to pay from savings and cash flow. Fidelity put out a report not that long ago. It's called the 10-Year College Report. It spanned the first 10 years of my career. This is my 12th year in the college funding space. But during 2007 to 2017, what the report said is that parents are saving more. Maybe there's 7 to 8 out of 10 families saving versus 6 to 7 a decade ago. But what they said is that out of all the money you're going to need for college, parents throughout the country have only been able to amass about 29% of the total value of college or an undergraduate cost, which is a blessing, but it still leaves us a 70% gap, if you will. Furthermore, the report said that in 2007, about 21% of the general population in our country was meeting with or consulting with or has hired a college funding expert or financial professional that can help them navigate this and save more dollars to help bridge this gap. 10 years later, at the end of 2017, movement into 2018, 41% of our general population was working with a qualified professional or financial professional on how to fund college and not have that back into retirement. So even still, with more people saving and higher percentages of people engaging professionals like ourselves here or throughout the nation, there's still this large gap. And what I wanted to do was talk about the 4 mistakes that can that can widen that gap or shorten that gap if you avoid the mistakes. The first mistake that I think a lot of families get tied into, I'm going to call it the beware of the student loan trap. And what I mean here is that this is where families, they don't really view this as a system, or much like there's a tax system in our country, or much like there's a legal system in our country, many millions of families are going to be going through the financial aid and admission system, and there's a lot of moving parts. And if you don't have the right counsel, or if you don't have the right data, and you don't view this as an investment, what a lot of people do to bridge that gap is they just rely on college loans to fill that gap. And that can be dangerous because some loans are like really easy to get into, but darn near impossible to wriggle out of. So like, for example, there's a loan that's a signature loan. It just requires the signature of the parents. It's called the Parent Plus loan. And it's typically offered to bridge the gap of whatever money's not met in free money, like from grants or scholarships. And parents don't really have a plan, or their planners have worked with them for several years and known about their kids, but they don't really have a plan outside of just maybe an IRA or funding your 401k to the max. And these families just take the loans. Well, like a Parent Plus loan, it's got 4.2% origination fees every single year you take that loan. It's like a 10-year note. And that, to me, is what I call a Bandaid approach. Those payments start out small, but they can compound very quickly and maybe be more than your mortgage payment. So if $20,000 in loans per year to bridge the gap, spread out over a couple kids, those payments could increase to maybe $1,800 a month, or $2,000 a month, or another mortgage payment, if you will. And that gets people into a lot of potential issues with cash flow and, oh goodness, all kinds of things. So we want to be aware of the student loan trap and just relying totally on loans to fill that gap. But in that breath, there are several different ways to borrow money for college. I'm not saying that having loans is a horrible thing. If you're going to borrow money for college, then I would say then you don't want to have any more loans than what your future anticipated annual salary may yield in total. So for example, if you're going to come out of school as an engineer and maybe make $60,000 to $70,000 a year, then you can afford really no more than that in total in debt to justify that investment. Well, since we know that there's about $1.6 trillion of student loan debt in our society, the majority of people on this call and throughout the country are going to probably have to go down this road. So the questions are, if you're going to have to borrow money, one, is it the right amount? Is it going to be the appropriate amount? But would you rather borrow the money and get a tax deduction or not get one? A lot of people will say, well, I'd rather get a tax deduction, but if that includes some kind of conversation around home equity or a refinance, then a lot of people shut down because they just don't understand how mortgages work or how you can harvest equity for the good and get a deduction. So that requires some consulting and some conversations. Or furthermore, if you have to borrow money for college, would you rather have a fixed monthly payment or a variable increasing payment? A lot of people don't realize there's options out there with that, or how they could procure one or the other. What about have an interest-free student loan or a high-interest student loan? So there are some loans out there that there's no interest that accrues while your son or daughter's in school until 6 months after he or she stops going, and it's truly in the student's name to where mom and dad don't have to co-sign. So what are those all about? Well, what about if you have to borrow money for college? What if you have to take a loan out each year, each semester, versus having the funds readily available prior to college beginning? This is a big one right here. So this is what I think a lot of people and advisors have not done well, is they will rely on loans to fill that gap. And really what we're doing there is just becoming a slave to the banking and the loan industries, because we have to pay them the principal and interest on their payment schedules. What we like to teach our clients is, if you're going to have a gap for college, meaning that it's not going to all be met by free money or loans and scholarships, and you're going to have to pony up some money, what if you could be strategic about having the funds readily available so that you're the bank, so that you could finance the gap of college and pay and recycle those dollars back to your family without interrupting compound interest? To me, that seems like a more efficient way to finance the gap of college and then reuse those dollars. So again, since so many people are going to have to borrow money in our country, where would you borrow the money from? Would you put it all in the student's name, your name? Would you want to try to get a tax deduction? Or would you want to pay yourself back without interrupting compound interest because you've planned and have had these funds readily available prior to college? Interesting. Well, the second mistake that I think families fall into is making assumptions about financial aid. And so what I thought I'd do is just talk a little bit about some myths and reality relative to financial aid. So first of all, a lot of people say, well, my income's too high, I'm not going to get any financial aid. And that may be true, but there are several families that I've been able to work with over the years that have really good income, maybe a couple $100,000 a year, but they have multiple kids in school at the same time. And depending on how many kids that you have in school at the same time, the sticker prices of those schools and where some of your other assets are arranged, some of those families could qualify for need-based financial aid even though they make a really nice income. So it just depends. It requires an analysis of your personal situation. And furthermore, what if you made $500,000 a year? Well, you're going to qualify for a type of aid. It may not be the type of aid that you really want, but you probably would get offered a $5,500 a year unsubsidized Stafford loan in your child's name from the government by filling out the FAFSA form, for example. So, maybe you want to create some leverage or create some skin in the game with your child, even though you have your money, and maybe you decide to take that $5,500 and let your student have that hanging over them while they perform, and you can make $500,000 a year and get that type of aid. Number two, a lot of families say, well, my daughter or my son doesn't have a 5.0 GPA. They don't take tons and tons of AP or CCP classes. We're probably not going to get anything. We should just go to probably Columbus State. Now, nothing wrong with Columbus State. I think it's a phenomenal avenue. But let's say that your son or daughter has a 3.2 GPA, probably like a B average, but they have challenged themselves and they've taken some CCP or some AP classes. And what if they crushed the ACT and got a 32? So they didn't have a 4.7 weighted GPA. They had a B average, but they have a very high ACT score. Well, at a school like OU, for example, kids that have like a 32, that could automatically mean like full tuition right off the gate. So sometimes, even though it sounds weird, B's could be better relative to the strength of your curriculum and test scores. So just because they don't have a very, very super high GPA doesn't mean that you're not going to get financial aid. If you own a home, your primary residence, okay, so you could have your primary house paid off, or you could have a very large equity spread in your primary residence, and that doesn't count against you as a parental asset on the FAFSA, the federal calculation that the government has in determining need. So a lot of people think, well, I got a lot of equity in the house, that's going to count against me, that's not fair. That's not necessarily true. If you're on this call and you have rental properties or land or farmland, that requires a little bit more due diligence, but your primary residence doesn't count against you on the majority of all colleges in this country that require the FAFSA form. Another myth versus reality is I just put it's an easy process. I would say that it's a ever-moving process. I would say that there's a lot of moving parts, and unless you're an expert on it, like in law or in taxes, it may not be super easy to understand how to put the puzzle together, and therefore you might need to either do quite a lot of research or consult professionals. Lastly, I would say school people can help. Well, in the same way that you and I probably would never take our taxes to the IRS or Uncle Sam to do them on a year-to-year basis, why would we want to take our taxes and complicated financial situation to a financial aid office who is not really on our side relative to giving us the best advice to make it as cheap as possible? So the IRS will do our taxes for free, but we know that they're going to do it the fastest, easiest way possible, not maximize deductions. So you just want to make sure that you just don't turn to the school's financial aid office and expect them to tell you every single possible way to lower the cost of college. So would we qualify for aid? Well, we'll never know if we don't apply. And these are just a few little myths versus reality to just kind of debunk maybe some things that you've heard. So making assumptions about financial aid. So for example, where does the money come from? A lot of people, they don't know where the money comes from. They think they do, but they don't. Well, there's 6 sources of college aid. The government supplies the majority of all the college aid. 65% of all college money comes from the government. The majority of free money that you and I probably will receive, though, throughout this entire process is going to probably come from the colleges and universities themselves. And they're only supplying about 19% of the overall aid that families get, but they can be very large chunks of aid to bridge the gap, if you will. So that's really interesting. State governments provide about 6% of all the funds. Employers supply about 5%. Veterans, the VA funds, about 1 to 2%. And then at the very end, we have things called private scholarships. Those typically supply the gap of about 2 to 4% of all the money coming from there. Things like your grandpa worked at Goodyear for 40 years. You have an uncle that works at the Walmart distribution center and they have private scholarships. Or maybe you're left-handed or were born with a heart murmur. Monies that are outside of the schools or federal or state funds is what I mean by private scholarships. A lot of people rely on those scholarships to bridge the gap, and sometimes they get disappointed if they're looking 97% of their time to bridge the gap with only about 2 to 4% of the money, if you will. So these are all sourced from the College Board, and I thought it'd be interesting for you guys to see, well, where is the best place to find free money? Typically, it's going to come from number 2, the endowment funds from the colleges and universities. As we move on, one of the biggest questions, or the $64,000 question is, well, how does my family get their fair share of aid? Well, it's one of the biggest ways that I wanted to talk about today, we have limited time, was to just explain and introduce to you guys the formula that the federal government of the United States of America uses on every family member to determine if you're going to qualify for some of these monies from the colleges. And so the formula is the cost of attendance of a school. That cost of attendance includes tuition, room, book, board, everything, minus this acronym called EFC. You have a EFC, and it's based on your personal financial and family information. That's why we have individual sessions here in the office to determine, what is your EFC and is there anything you can do about it? So the cost of a school minus your specific family's EFC equals a potential need. And man, if you could know this before you look at schools and know which schools might be able to give you need-based aid, that can help you be a better investor. So you need to have that calculated. You need to work with somebody that understands that. There's three types of families that need good college planning, but there's different types of categories, if you will, throughout this process. So if you're a Category 1 family with an AGI of about 60,000 or so or less, adjusted gross income, you're going to probably get financial aid wherever you go to school. These are typically people with low to moderate income and assets, not very high net worths. And a lot of times they think that they can't afford college, or they just don't know the rules to help them get the money. And there's a lot that can be done with a Category 1. A Category 2 family could receive partial financial need, and these families hover around $60,000 to $250,000 a year of adjusted gross income. Those families that would get some need-based financial aid, it's going to depend on which schools that they look at and how they arrange their income and assets on these financial aid forms. Most of the people on the call, or most of the people in the room that we speak with, fall into this category. That requires some strategy sessions. And a Category 3 family is just blessed with income and net worth. Their AGIs are 250 or above typically. And although they probably aren't going to qualify for need-based aid, they still have to go through the same process to go after merit-based, which has nothing to do with your income and assets. So whether you're a 1, 2, or 3 category, there's things that can be done, and we invite you guys to come in or invite others that you know and love to get their category assessed and figure out ways that they can save money for school. Mistake number 3 that I want to talk about today is financial aid form mistakes, missed deadlines, overstatement of assets and income, which kind of dovetails into what I just talked about briefly. Well, in order to maximize some of the system, you got to get to know the FAFSA. The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It's the form that unleashes that formula that I just showed you. The cost of attendance minus your EFC equals your need. You guys need to realize that nobody will get any aid unless you apply. That means that you have to do the FAFSA form fully and correctly. And the reality is that percentages of these FAFSA forms are submitted with errors and inconsistencies, or they put things in the wrong category that might raise what the government expects them to pay. And that can just get you guys pushed back. It can cost you time, which can cost you aid. Some financial aid is given out first come, first serve. So you got to understand this form. It's kind of like doing your taxes in some capacity each year. They're going to ask for a bunch of different things. The first day you can fill out this FAFSA form to unleash these loans and grants and things like that from the government is October 1 of your senior year. So those of you on the call that have incoming seniors, we don't have much time to get that form prepped and ready to be filed and filled out as accurately as you can to see what you can get. Conversely, some people in here are not going to look at just state schools. They're going to look at private schools like Harvard or Brown or MIT. Well, those types of schools can require a very, like a different financial aid form, a specific form that's called the CSS profile form. And this is outside of the federal methodology. This is the institutional methodology. So the schools that have these very large endowment funds can ask you whatever questions that they want and divvy out what they see fit based on the CSS profile form. It's another financial aid form asked to be filled out in addition to the government FAFSA form. There's about 250 schools in the country that may require this form. So some schools have their own, like I said, institutional forms and require the profile. Some of you on this call may be business owners. You may have farmland. You may be in a divorced or separated agreement. All these situations can lead to widening that gap or shrinking that gap based on how you put your information down on the FAFSA and or how you are able to save money to be like your own source of financing. So again, just for the sake of time, we can't get too much into this. Maybe it's a webinar for another day, but we need to know these types of things in order to best help you. And unfortunately, in our country, 1 out of every 2 marriages, I believe, is in a divorced or separated agreement, and that can have a huge swing. I was just at a client's house last night who's going through the same scenario, and we were having a discussion about whose financial information has to go on the FAFSA form, which one would be more advantageous to maybe show need-based financial aid. So again, this stuff happens all the time. It's not just, going to a school and filling out the form and that's it. There's strategies. It's a system. So on the FAFSA form, they're going to ask parents for a lot of things, like how much money do you make, where's your taxes, how many kids are in school, and where's a lot of your liquid assets, like checking savings accounts, or do you have a 529 plan? And they're going to just mash this stuff all up into a bowl, and it's going to spit out what the government expects you to pay. And if you could do something to lower your EFC, you're going to want to take a look at that sooner rather than later as you're approaching college. Okay, so again, it's just a bunch of information that's individual to each family. I would say that the fourth mistake that families make here as we try to wind down our webinar today is selecting the wrong college and career path. Not all colleges are created equal. I'll pull these things up right here so you guys can look at them. But, if you get into a school or you don't know what the school really is or what they offer as an internal financial history, it's important for you guys to know that some schools meet 100% of your need. Others may only meet 30 to 50% of your need. Some schools, they don't give merit-based. You get in based off merit, and then they just look at your income and assets and tell you this is what we expect you to pay. But what percentage of gift aid does the college give? Like free money versus loans is important. And this is sometimes what makes $70,000 a year schools cheaper or almost the same cost as state schools. And I put down here is that it can know these types of statistics before you apply. In the same way that as parents, we would never buy a house for $300,000 that was appraised for $150,000, we shouldn't buy college that way. And if we knew some of these metrics, knew some of the schools that met need-based aid with more free money versus loan money or vice versa, that can help us be a more savvy investor on this thing called college. So on the career planning and school selection, these are some pretty alarming stats. 27% of college freshmen don't go back their sophomore year. 1/3 of college students transfer to a different school. Almost 60% take 6 years to complete their bachelor's degree, and almost 50% never graduate college at all. So, wow, you talk about widening the gap. By not having a good career planning, guideline or choosing the wrong schools, having an improper school list. Gosh, I mean, just one extra semester of college can cost tens of thousands of extra dollars to your family, and that's not good. That's why we worked really hard on hiring our current college and career coach, Greg Davis. Greg's got 14 years experience in helping kids plan and prepare for their careers and school selections so that our kids don't go an extra year or two. We can save families sometimes $20,000, $30,000. And I thought this was kind of humorous, but this is from the UCLA Laboratory of Neuroimaging. These are pictures of a 5-year-old brain, preteen brain, a teenager's brain, and a 20-year-old brain. Red to orange means it's more immature, all the way to the purple, meaning the most mature. And if you wonder why sometimes people choose the wrong schools, or kids change their minds so much, or end up going an extra year or two, or thinking they want to start out in nursing but then end up in education, is because, gosh, their brains aren't even fully developed. So it's kind of hard to plan for your life when you're dealing with half a brain, so to speak, as far as its biological development. But it does just bring into a point that because of our teenagers' brains being so fresh and young, having some wisdom, having some expertise to help them make these decisions can actually be a great money saver. So as we improve our odds for success here, I like this timeline. I think it's a good visual. I think it's a symbiotic relationship between the students and parents and the things that they need to be doing during their high school careers. You really only get 3 years in high school to really work this system and get it right. The senior year, there's a lot of administrative things that happen. And so if it's everything from getting good academics to building a resume to working with a good career planner to doing community service or prepping to get as high as you can on the ACT and writing killer essays that can maybe get you into elite schools, all these things can help our families improve their odds for success. And it's why that for the past 12 years, I've worked really hard to build like a turnkey college planning system here at Keystone. We do provide expertise and guidance throughout this entire system. And if you look right here, this is a good visual of how we tie in the responsibilities of the student, the responsibilities of the family and the student, and the responsibilities of the parents. If you're going to have a good college plan, you got to have 3 legs. You got to have a leg that deals with the career planning side. And that's why, like I said, we have a career planner that works one-on-one with our students their entire high school career to help them gain better awareness, to not go an extra year in school, and that can save people a lot of money. But we also want to involve the families and make sure that they're involved in that process, but also do the administrative things correctly. That's leg number 2. So you have to have a good admissions career planning leg. You have to have a good administrative leg. Make sure that all the forms and everything are done correctly on time, that you know your EFC and you can manage that if there's things that you can do. And then the third leg of a good college planning system is to have your financial plan, your financial house in order. College is a retirement issue, and you have to assess how paying for college is going to impact you in retirement. And we also have to assess the opportunities to find extra cash flow or to build funds that are readily available to help bridge that gap, so you're not being a slave to the banks, the lending institutions, or the financing companies out there, that we can teach our clients how to finance the gap of college, recycle those monies back to the family, and use them again in retirement. If you do all those things, all 3 of those things well, then we feel that you're on your way to making a good investment and avoiding these 4 mistakes that so many of us fall into. I'll leave you guys with this today, is 2 quotes. One is from Sally Mae. Families who plan ahead for college borrow on average 48% less. Wow. So if you're on this call today and you have a senior, or if you're on this call today and you have a 4-year-old, it's not too early. Planning involves a lot of different moving parts, from saving and creating compound interest to making sure you do the FAFSA correctly. I would encourage you guys to give us a call, set up a review, or introduce us to friends, loved ones, coworkers that are going to be facing this massive wealth transfer. And lastly, I'll leave you with this quote from T. Boone Pickens. T. Boone Pickens is a billionaire. He owns pretty much all of Oklahoma State University. He's huge in wind and oil energy. But he says, a fool with a plan is better than a genius with none. And I think that everybody on this call and everybody in this country is going to go through this system in some way, shape, or form when it comes to the traditional college plan. And it's kind of like flying on an airplane. Everybody on an airplane has paid a different sticker price for their ticket. Some people have paid the best price, and some people had to pay the highest price based on circumstances. And the ones that get the best deal on those plane tickets are the ones that have planned and prepared. And it's the same thing with college. If you're going to plan and prepare and avoid these 4 mistakes, you're going to have a much more affordable ride through college, and therefore a much more fruitful retirement. For those of you that would like to schedule an evaluation of your current college plan, we encourage you to call Rose here at 614-300-9498. You can email her, as you see below, with a couple dates and times that would work for your schedule. We'd love to meet you and evaluate your situation and see if we can help you. We love to put on these educational webinars for our clients. Here at Keystone, we want to bring not just a good, strong solution, but we want to build relationships. So if you have any feedback, please let us know. And we just encourage you to keep tuning in for these topics that we have coming up over the months ahead. Take care, and God bless.